Stay back! This is the last of it!
We are lost! There is no escape!
Please, God, show me the way. We are so very lost.
What if I told you that the Empire's greatest treasure became its deadliest curse? The history of seafaring is littered with disasters, but the tragedy of the galleon San Juan stands apart in the annals of human suffering and resilience. In 1552, Portugal's richest and most powerful ship, laden with priceless Chinese porcelain and spices, encountered forces that no amount of gold could buy. On board were the elite of society, confident in their invulnerability and their right to rule over the elements. However, the coast of South Africa, known as the Wild Coast, quickly erased the differences between captain and slave, making them all equal in the face of death. This is not just a story about a shipwreck, but a chronicle of the slow disintegration of civilization under the blows of hunger, betrayal, and madness. Watch the video to the end to find out how a handful of people went through hell on earth and what a terrible price the Empire paid for its pride. What if I showed you a time machine that would take us back to the moment when the fate of hundreds of people was decided by a single mistake? The galleon San Juan left the Indian port of Cochin in February 1552, representing the pinnacle of 16th century engineering. It was a veritable floating palace, its holds bursting with pepper, precious stones, and unique Ming Dynasty porcelain. The ship's captain was Manuel de Sousa Sepulveda, a man of noble birth, wealth, and seemingly blessed by fortune. Accompanying him on his return to Lisbon were his wife, the beautiful Leonor de Sá, and a large entourage. None of them could have imagined that this voyage would be their final test of will and faith. The grandeur of the ship instilled a false sense of security that lulled the experienced sailors into complacency. However, the ocean lives by its own laws, which are not subject to royal decrees or the wishes of the nobility. Off the coast of the Cape of Good Hope, notorious for its storms, the weather changed dramatically, turning the horizon into a black wall. The gusting wind tore the sails to shreds, depriving the ship of control and maneuverability. Huge waves, as high as a fortress wall, crashed against the wooden hull, testing the strength of the shipbuilder's work. The crew, exhausted from weeks of battling the elements, worked to the limits of human endurance trying to save the ship. But the overloaded galleon, having lost its mass and rudder, became a helpless toy in the hands of the raging ocean. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that there were too many people on board who were not accustomed to hard physical labor. Panic among the passengers hindered the coordinated actions of the crew, creating chaos on the decks. Captain Manuel de Sousa, trying to maintain order, gave orders that were drowned out by the noise of the storm and cries of despair. A fateful but only possible decision was made to steer the dying galleon toward the shore. It was a choice between certain death in the abyss and a slim chance of salvation on land. We are very interested to hear your opinion. What would you choose if you were the captain? Stay with the wreckage in the hope of a passing ship, or venture into the unknown through wild lands? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the denouement of this drama.
In the vastness of the lonely sea, I raised my head, foretelling doom.
Are you ready for the shocking truth about how quickly people get used to hopelessness? The first days on shore were filled with feverish activity that created the illusion of control over the situation. The survivors, numbering about 500, built a fortified camp out of the wreckage of the ship and chess. This fortress-like structure was intended to protect them from possible attacks by local tribes and wild animals. Captain de Sousa attempted to restore a semblance of military discipline by assigning duties and rations. It seemed that order had been restored and that they had a chance to wait for help or build a small boat. The camp was filled with a strange mixture of hope and despair, fueled by rumors and fears. People sorted through the salvaged items, trying to dry their clothes and preserve the remaining food. Those who had managed to save their weapons cleaned their muskets and swords of rust and sand. The women, including Leonor de Sa, tried to organize daily life and care for the wounded, showing remarkable fortitude. However, every glance at the horizon, where there was not a sail in sight, reminded them of their complete isolation. Soon, the first contact with the local population took place, shattering their fragile sense of security. Dark-skinned warriors appeared on the hills, watching the newcomers with wary curiosity. The Portuguese, accustomed to considering themselves masters of the world, tried to establish trade, offering fabrics and iron. But the language barrier and mutual distrust made any negotiations tense and dangerous. It became clear that they were not guests here, but uninvited visitors whose presence caused irritation. Attempts to build a ship from the wreckage of the galleon failed due to a lack of tools and skilled carpenters. What they managed to assemble was too unreliable to venture out into the open ocean. The realization that the sea route was closed was a heavy psychological blow to everyone. Now there was only one option left: to walk along the coast to the nearest Portuguese fort. This meant hundreds of kilometers of travel through unknown territory, full of rivers, mountains, and dangers. The captain decided to proceed, realizing that delay would mean starvation in the camp. The preparations were long and painful, as everyone tried to take as many valuables with them as possible. People could not let go of the illusion of wealth, filling their pockets with gold and stones. They did not understand that on the journey ahead, every extra kilogram of weight could cost them their lives. This attachment to material things would become their main enemy in the first weeks of the expedition. By the end of the first month of the journey, it became clear that they had underestimated the difficulty of the route. Food supplies were running low, and hopes for a quick rescue were fading. They pressed on, not so much because of their belief in success, but because it was impossible to turn back. The journey turned into a mechanical movement of their legs, where each step was a small victory over death. Do you think the love of gold can be stronger than the instinct for self-preservation? The secret that people pay thousands for is the ability to let go of the past in time to preserve the future. As they advanced deeper into the continent, the weight of the load they carried became a critical factor for survival. Exquisite clothing, silverware, and bags of coins turned from status symbols into shackles. People, exhausted by hunger and heat, began to throw away what they had recently considered most valuable. The road behind the column was littered with luxury items that were now worthless. It was a painful process of saying goodbye to the hope of returning to their former lives. Each discarded item was an acknowledgement that their world had changed forever. But even after getting rid of the physical burden, many could not shake off the mental weight of their situation. It was especially difficult for the nobility, who were never accustomed to physical deprivation. Men and women whose hands had never known anything heavier than a pen or a fan now carried supplies of water and food. Their shoes, made of thin leather, quickly wore out on the rocky trails. Bloody blisters and bruised feet became a common problem, equalizing everyone in their suffering. Pain became a constant backdrop to their existence, drowning out all other feelings. Water became the new currency, its value exceeding that of any diamond. Sources were rare, and often the water in them was brackish or dirty. People were willing to give all their gold for a single sip of clean water. Those who were more prudent and kept their flasks gained power over those who were careless. At such moments, the true nature of man, stripped of the veneer of civilization, was revealed. Hunger forced people to rethink all their dietary restrictions and habits. When the crackers and salted meat ran out, they ate whatever they could find. People began to eat roots, unknown berries, and shellfish collected on the shore. There were cases of poisoning when unfamiliar plants caused excruciating pain and death. But the fear of starvation was stronger than the fear of poisoning. Hunting wild animals was a rare success, as the noise of the large crowd scared away all living creatures. Sometimes they managed to buy or barter a goat or cow from local tribes. On such days, the camp was filled with celebration, and people forgot their troubles for a moment. But there was always little meat, and its distribution often caused conflicts and fights. The strong took the best pieces, leaving only bones and entrails for the weak. Thus, the journey became not just a physical journey, but also a spiritual purification through deprivation. People learned the value of things, life, and each other. Gold lying in the dust of the road became a symbol of the futility of human efforts. They learned to live in the here and now, where only the next step and a sip of water mattered. And if you like this format of historical stories, don't forget to like this video. What if I told you that the most profitable deals were not made on the stock exchanges, but on the brink of destruction? Encounters with local tribes became more frequent and unpredictable. Sometimes the natives were curious and offered to trade. Sometimes they were openly aggressive. Deprived of the ability to dictate terms by force, the Portuguese were forced to learn the diplomacy of desperation. They exchanged iron nails pulled from the wreckage of boxes for flatbread and milk. Iron was more valuable to the locals than gold, as it could be used to make spearheads. The Portuguese quickly understood this peculiarity of the market and began to use any piece of metal as currency. Old knives, buckles, even buttons were used to obtain food. It was a surreal picture. The richest people in Europe trading trash to survive. But even such exchanges did not always guarantee the safety and honesty of the transaction. It often happened that after receiving payment, the locals simply disappeared without giving anything in return. Or they would bring livestock, but at the last moment attack the buyers, trying to take back the goods by force. The language barrier was overcome with gestures, drawings in the sand, and demonstrations of goods. It took tremendous patience and observation to understand the intentions of the other side. The slightest misunderstanding could lead to conflict and bloodshed. Captain de Souza personally participated in the negotiations, trying to smooth things over with his authority. His composure in these moments was the only thing that kept the situation from exploding. However, the resources for exchange were dwindling day by day, as were the physical strength of the people. When the metal ran out, the last pieces of jewelry and clothing were used. This was a dangerous moment, as without their clothes, the Portuguese lost their status in the eyes of the locals. They became like outcasts who could be robbed and killed with impunity. Respect for them was based solely on the remnants of their former greatness and the strangeness of their appearance. At one point, the group encountered a tribe that refused to trade. They simply followed the column like a pack of predators, waiting for their prey to weaken completely. This psychological pressure was worse than open combat. The people felt constant stares from the bushes and heard the roll call of drums. The feeling that they were game being hunted by hunters was maddening. In this chapter, we saw how economic laws work in extreme conditions. Value is determined not by the market, but by need, and the price of a mistake is life. What do you think is the hardest currency in a situation of complete collapse of civilization? No punches pulled, just the harsh truth about human nature. As physical suffering intensified, the social structure of the group began to rapidly disintegrate. The authority of Captain Manuel de Souza, which was based on his rank and charisma, ceased to be absolute. Driven to despair by hunger, people began to question his decisions and orders. Spontaneous meetings arose, with calls to choose a new leader or split the group. The first sign of a split was the separation of a group of sailors and soldiers who decided to move faster. They believed that women, children, and the sick were slowing them down and dooming everyone to death. This group took some of the weapons and left their comrades behind. This betrayal was a heavy blow to those who remained, depriving them of a significant part of their fighting force. Morale fell to a critical level, giving way to apathy and resentment. Conflicts over food in the best places by the fire also began within the main group. The strong took the last of the weak, forgetting the code of honor and Christian charity. Former servants stopped obeying their masters, realizing that in this hell, everyone was equal. The social hierarchy was turned upside down. Now the one with a stick or a knife was the boss. Fights broke out over anything, and blood was shed not by enemies but by their own hands. Manuel de Souza tried to maintain the appearance of order, but his strength was also running out. He was torn between his duty as commander and his concern for his wife and children. Seeing Leonor's suffering, he often made decisions dictated by emotion rather than tactics. This caused even greater irritation among the others, who believed that the captain was putting his family above the common good. Trust in the leader was lost, and everyone began to think only of themselves. Disease decimated the ranks of survivors faster than hunger or the arrows of the natives. Lack of hygiene, dirty water, and exhaustion led to outbreaks of dysentery and fever. People died on the spot, and the living did not have the strength to bury them. The bodies were simply left on the side of the road, where they became prey to wild animals. Death became commonplace, and people stopped paying attention to it. There were cases of insanity when people, unable to withstand the stress, lost their minds. Some ran away into the bush, some threw themselves into rivers, some just sat and rocked, staring at one point. The cries of the insane at night added horror to an already nightmarish atmosphere. The healthy tried to stay away from the sick, fearing not only infection, but also madness. The group turned into a collection of loners wandering in the same direction. It was a lesson that society is only strong when its members are willing to sacrifice themselves for others. As soon as selfishness takes over, any structure collapses, leaving chaos in its wake. In the next chapter, you will learn how nature presented them with one last, insurmountable obstacle. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about is that nature never plays fair. The next test for the exhausted travelers was a great river that blocked their path to salvation. It was not just a water barrier, but a turbulent stream with a strong current and teeming with dangers. Crossing it required strength and resources that the group had almost completely exhausted. But there was no way around it, and they had to take on the water element. The construction of rafts was the last act of organized labor in this story. People staggering from weakness chopped branches and tied them together with the remains of ropes and vines. They even used their own clothes, torn into strips to fasten the logs together. The first attempts at crossing ended in tragedy. Several rafts capsized and people drowned. The current was too strong and the homemade structures too fragile. The cries of the drowning, carried away by the current into the ocean, echoed across the water. Those left on the shore watched in shock, knowing that the same fate awaited them. But there was nowhere to retreat to, only starvation behind them. It was decided to cross in small groups, using the most reliable rafts. Captain de Souza personally supervised the loading, trying to calm the panicking people. Women and children were placed in the center to protect them from the waves. The men rowed with improvised oars, fighting the current until their muscles tore. Each successful crossing was perceived as a miracle. At this moment of vulnerability, what everyone feared most happened. The local tribes who had been watching the crossing decided to attack the divided group. Those who had already crossed found themselves cut off from the main forces and weapons. A chaotic skirmish began, in which the Portuguese had no chance of organized resistance. It was a massacre on water and on land. The attackers took advantage of the situation to seize the remaining property and clothing. They snatched things right out of people's hands, knocked them down, and pushed them into the water. The Portuguese, unable to defend themselves, could only try to escape. Many were wounded by stones and spears, but continued to swim or run. The river was stained with blood mixed with muddy water. This episode was a turning point, after which hope gave way to despair. The river took not only lives, but also what remained of the will to resist. Are you ready to find out how low a person can fall when they are deprived of the last thing they have left? Their dignity? After crossing the river, the remnants of the group, now numbering only a few dozen people, continued on their way. They resembled the living dead, deprived of everything except the spark of life. Soon they came to a large settlement ruled by a local chief who seemed more friendly than the others. He invited the Portuguese to his village, promising food and protection. The exhausted people, having lost their vigilance, took this as a godsend. The chief welcomed them with ostentatious hospitality, feeding them and allowing them to rest. This lulled the captain and his companions into a false sense of security. They believed they had found a refuge where they could gather their strength before the final push. However, it was a cunning trap designed to obtain the remaining valuables without a fight. The chief knew that the newcomers still had jewels hidden in their rags. A few days later, the tone of the host changed dramatically. The chief declared that the Portuguese must pay for their hospitality with everything they had. He demanded that they surrender all their weapons, including personal daggers and hidden pistols. Manuel de Sousa, realizing that resistance was futile, ordered them to obey. This was complete disarmament, turning them into defenseless sheep. Then came a demand that finally broke the spirit of the proud Europeans. The chief ordered them to remove the rest of their clothes, claiming that gold was hidden in them. For people of the 16th century, raised with strict moral rules, this was an unthinkable humiliation. But the fear of death and the desire to save their children forced them to obey. They were stripped naked, leaving them only in what they were born in. This act of humiliation was not just robbery, but a symbolic destruction of their identity. Deprived of their clothes, they lost the last marker of their belonging to the civilized world. They stood before the laughing villagers, covering themselves with their hands crushed by shame. Leonor de Sá, a noble lady, wept, unable to bear the disgrace. Her husband, powerless to change anything, looked away. The end of the story of Manuel de Sousa and Leonor de Sá became a legend full of tragedy and horror. Left alone in the desert, they reached the limits of their physical and mental strength. Leonor, unable to bear the shame of her nakedness and exhaustion, dug a hole in the sand. She lay down in it and covered herself up to her waist to hide her body from the sun and prying eyes. With her hair loose covering her chest, she refused to go any further. Manuel de Sousa, maddened with grief, sat next to her, holding her hand. He saw the life drained from the woman he loved more than anything else in the world. Their children, also exhausted to the limit, died one after another before their eyes. It was a scene of utter grief that cannot be described in words. The death of his children was the final blow that destroyed the captain's sanity. Leonor died quietly without complaint, accepting her fate with the resignation of a martyr. Manuel, left alone, buried her in the same sand that had become her final refuge. After that, he could not stay where he was. Broken, he got up and went into the bush, disappearing forever. No one knows how or where he died, but his traces were lost in the African wilderness. The surviving witnesses to this scene were shaken to the core. The death of the commander and his wife became a symbol of the expedition's final demise. Some slaves and servants, accustomed to harsh conditions, were able to adapt better than their masters. They learned to find water and food where Europeans saw only desert. It is thanks to them that the story of the last days of the de Sousa couple has come down to us. They became the guardians of the memory of the tragedy, which they later recounted to their rescuers.
With the letter. When she read it, she knew there was no return.
Of the more than 500 people who set foot on shore, only a few made it to the Portuguese fort in Mozambique. They were not the strongest or the most noble, but the luckiest and most adaptable. Only about 8 Portuguese and a dozen slaves were able to overcome this hellish marathon. They were saved by a miracle, an encounter with a Portuguese merchant ship that had entered the Bay of Delagoa to trade in ivory. The sight of the survivors shocked the sailors. They were skeletons covered in blackened skin, not resembling humans. They could not speak, only cry and reach out for water. Their minds had been damaged by the horror they had experienced, and many were never able to fully recover. They were living witnesses to what lies beyond human capabilities. Rescue came too late for most, but in time to preserve the story. The survivors told of the fate of the San Juan, the death of the captain, and all the horrors of the journey. Their stories were recorded and sent to Lisbon, where they caused a real shock. The empire learned the price it had to pay for its ambitions. These people, who had returned from the dead, became outcasts in their own society. They were shunned like lepers, seen as marked by death. They carried the darkness of the wild coast with them until the end of their days. No amount of gold could compensate for what they had lost on the journey. The fate of the slaves who survived the journey was no less tragic, but also instructive. They showed greater resilience and survival skills than their masters. Some of them were granted their freedom as a reward for their suffering and assistance. It was a rare case of social justice in that cruel era. The story of the San Juan did not fade into obscurity, but became a cornerstone of Portuguese literature. It opened a cycle of so-called tragic stories of the sea, a collection of stories about shipwrecks. These texts were read like adventure novels, but they were a terrible documentary truth. They shaped the national consciousness, reminding people of the price of discovery. The poet Luis de Camões, author of the Lusíads, was so shocked by the fate of Manuel and Leonor that he included references to it in his poem. The image of the giant Adamastor, personifying the Cape of Good Hope, became a symbol of the merciless elements taking revenge on people. The story took on mythological proportions, becoming part of Portugal's cultural code. From a practical point of view, the disaster led to improvements in the cartography of the South African coast. Sailors became more cautious in these waters, avoiding getting too close to the shore. New routes and rules of conduct in the event of shipwrecks were developed. The experience, paid for with hundreds of lives, saved thousands more in the future. This story also raised important questions about morality and faith. Theologians and philosophers argued about why God allowed such suffering of the innocent. They sought answers in the sinfulness of wealth and pride, seeing the shipwreck as divine punishment. This influenced people's minds, forcing them to reflect on the transience of all earthly things. Today, the site of the San Juan's wreck attracts archaeologists and historians. The fragments of Ming Dynasty porcelain found there confirm the accuracy of ancient chronicles. These shards are silent witnesses to former luxury and the tragedy that followed. They remind us how closely the history of trade and the history of suffering are intertwined. The tragedy of the San Juan is a timeless reminder that technology does not make us omnipotent. Nature always has the last word, and respect for it is the key to survival. The human factor, with its weaknesses and strengths, remains the main variable in any equation. We look at this story from the safety of the future, but its lessons are still relevant today. In a world where we all depend on complex systems, it is important to remember the fragility of our civilization. One storm, one mistake, and we find ourselves back on the wild shore. We have come a long way with the passengers of the San Juan, from the golden decks to the nameless graves in the sand. This story has shown us how thin the line is between greatness and insignificance, between civilization and savagery. They defeated the storm, but lost to their own weaknesses, illnesses, and cruel reality. But their defeat became a victory of spirit for those who managed to preserve their humanity to the end. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel about other forgotten pages of history in the comments. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss new journeys into the past.